the questions. So somebody start us off.
And the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and its mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and its mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the air, also male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him.
In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On this very same day, Noah with his sons, Shem and Ham and Joseph, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons entered the ark. They and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps the earth, and every bird of every kind, every bird, every winged creature. Then they went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark flowed on the face of the waters.
At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent out the raven, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent out the dove from him to see if the waters have subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set its foot, and it returned to him to the ark. The waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took it and brought it into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters have subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent it out the dove, and he did not return to him anymore.
In the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked and saw that the face of the ground was drying. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, "Go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on earth, so that they may be abound on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, and every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth, went out of the ark by families.
Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I'm establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I've made between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth."
Thank you all. We can go back and forth between the readings and the questions, just to, if somebody wants to refer, but to those. But what image speaks to you most right now? Forget the leader piece, just what speaks to you most right now?
This was not a short process. This was a long time that they were on that ark. And they were very, very careful about leaving.
They didn't get frustrated. They didn't get annoyed,
Oh,
or
we
at
don't
least
know
enough that they were going to disobey God. And they were locked up for 40 days. Well, we get it. And then there were 2 more months before the land was dry enough for the dove to decide it wasn't going to come back. So I think there's, that's a great image of being locked up with it raining every single day, which to me would be very depressing, and dealing with it.
I have to admit, I was struck by, I mean, it's been a long time since I read this story, but I was struck by the thing that after, the bird came back and they looked out and the land was dry. And, and then it was another 6 weeks before they left, 6 or 7 weeks. They took off the covering, but, it was first day of the month in the first year, the waters were dry and they removed the covering and the face of the ground was drying. And then it wasn't until, almost 2 full months later. I sort of hadn't.
That's what the text says.
Yeah, I know. I hadn't sort of put all of that together.
Was the ground not dry enough?
Well, they didn't seem to think so. Are there other images here that speak to folks?
The bird coming back with a piece of, with a leaf.
What does that say? How does that, what does that say to you?
That there's land.
Okay.
With trees on it.
The
Wonder
trees
why-
are blooming.
Yeah, I wonder why he brought back an olive leaf. I wonder what the significance of that is.
Yeah, good question. I could look it up.
Olives were very important at that time in the world because they were both food, they were oil.
Does an olive leaf mean, when I think of an olive leaf, I think of peace.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering, if that's what they were thinking of, peace.
Well, I looked it up. Okay. Olive tree, highly regarded. Its fruit was a mainstay of the diet. Long-lived, venerable, has almost mythical character. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long. So, peace and bountifulness. Maybe it signified promise. Other images.
Struck
Well,
by.
this is,
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that, and this is my warped sense of humor, but I thought, I wonder if Noah got any mosquitoes on the ark. And you don't have to respond. I just thought, oh, God.
Well, I just did this same reading with St. James Church in Wheat Ridge, and they were all concerned about fish. I just thought that was interesting. There's no mention of the fish. But it struck me then, and it strikes me again this morning, that so much of what I think about this story is kind of Sunday school-ish. And there's really a lot more meat to this story than you could cover in, Sunday school in my day. For example, why was the first bird sent out a raven? We remember the doves, but we don't remember the raven. That wasn't how it was told to us in Sunday school.
My commentary says that bird was sent out because it's very strong and has a lot of endurance.
Aha.
Now, whether that's true, I don't know, but that's what my commentary says.
Well, doves could be trained to come home. Remember, they're a member of the pigeon family, so they can come home.
Now, ravens do a great job of soaring. If you ever watch them, ravens or crows, any of the corvids, they're great soaring birds. If you ever watch doves fly, they do not soar. They flap a lot, going from place to place.
They work.
Well, ravens can cover much greater distances, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
They were also scavengers. And if there were any dead things out there, they could survive.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Omnivorous. Yep. What do you think?
I like the fish question. I'm thinking about that one. I think they all got to survive on the Earth's waters.
Describe the environment on the ark near day 40. How do you think Noah felt? What about the others on the boat? This gets at sort of Irma's assumption that they weren't complaining.
Felt like quarantine.
Yeah. Well, I don't really assume that, but they didn't disobey God. They probably complained, but they didn't disobey God.
Well, I can imagine it probably wasn't a very pleasant environment on the ark by the end of 40 days.
No.
As a child, I always wondered what they ate. Maybe it's because I'm a foodie, but, and it's a wonder that the food chain didn't kind of kick in at that point after being there for 40 days. Just wondering.
I gather they caught fish off the.
Maybe that's what happened to the fish.
I told you, the fish outside the ark.
Well, and they did have more of the clean animals than the rest of the animals.
Animals smell bad after 40 days.
They smell bad after one
Bad
day.
a lot earlier than that.
Why you clean them out every day?
Go to people.
I think they meant by clean
Yes.
animals. By clean animals, they meant that they could use them for sacrifices and they could also eat them. Versus dirty meant that they couldn't.
Yeah.
Right, so they had a lot more of the clean animals. And the first thing Noah does after they get onto solid land is sacrifice. So.
Well, I remember being, I think probably in Norway, and one of the museums from the Nordic warriors and the wanderers and whatever, and these boats, and families, whole families went on these huge boats, and there was this area underneath the deck. The top deck was just for all that was lined with rowers, and then underneath was a space. It was only about 3 feet tall, so you couldn't even stand up straight. But they had cows and pigs and chickens and everything else, along with all the families that lived on that boat underneath. And you can imagine how awful it must have been. Although I guess after a while you wouldn't notice the smell because it would just be part of it, but still. But they butchered, they cooked, they did everything underneath in that same space.
They were
My
shorter.
Viking hair ancestors are pretty strong people.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? How did Noah feel? Having to deal with the leadership role of family and all of these critters.
Probably like Governor Polis feels. And I had an idea, and I've got to share it with my friend who is a CNA in a nursing home, because they aren't allowing anybody in, they need to have therapy dogs going in the nursing homes, because that would be one person and the dog gives great comfort. So I'm going to put that out there as a possible help until family members are able to come visit again. Because it's hard. It's really hard. So.
I was the
Noah must
nurse.
have been an amazing person, because or people in those days were a lot more compliant than they are today. Because if I were Noah, with today's people, there are some people I would be really tempted to throw off the boat.
In your own family?
No, but in
Oh.
the community.
Yes.
There are days when I would throw Robert off the boat, but not most days.
And he had his adult children with him and their spouses. There apparently were no kids.
Well, it doesn't mention children, does it?
Nope.
And it doesn't mention babies among any of the animals.
No.
So the rabbits were, I guess, safe because they certainly can multiply fast. But
I think, they were on the boat, what, about 80 days, maybe a little more. If you think that it rained for 40 days, and then they were on the, there for another month plus 27 days. So, that's, 4 months,
Mm-hmm.
4.5 months. Long time.
Long time.
Yeah, what food, how did he do the food?
I don't know. They don't tell us.
Yeah, did they eat, the animals eat each other?
Yeah.
The animals that were eaten were probably those that became extinct, right?
Yeah, they all fed on unicorns.
That's why we don't have any, right?
Yeah. So how does Noah determine when it's safe to get off the ark? And was this a wise decision, or why not?
he used science. He knew that the bird would come back if there wasn't any dry land anywhere, something to pick up. And that was using science. I like it.
He sees regeneration of the earth.
Yeah.
The bird comes back with the green material, so he knows that the earth's surface is regenerated and is healthy.
But they still don't get off until God tells them to.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Well, God made the flood, and that was probably somewhat terrifying when they really were into it. And I thought they decided that they weren't going to have God mad at them and do something to them, because everybody else got drowned. So when you are in that kind of situation, you become more compliant. And
Well,
I think that was,
we've got the story here that they sent out the dove, which then did not return. And then it was still, then it was still 2 months before they got off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it has, there's a sign that that the dove found someplace to land, right?
yeah.
But they didn't get out.
Well, I'm
And the dove
also
doesn't have its
amazed.
mate.
I'm amazed at Noah's fortitude and not peeking. He didn't take off the cover until after the dove didn't come back to even peek to see what was going on out there. I could not have done that.
I'm big on peeking.
I am too. Even if it was just rain, I would have wanted to look and see the rain, if nothing else.
Well, he had windows. It says so in verse 6. So there were windows on the boat, but But you could probably not see very much from one window.
No.
On the point of it, what it must have been like, there's some Swiss villages that are designed so that the houses have the cows living underneath over winter.
Mhm.
And so that generates heat. It generates smells. Obviously, they gather grass and stuff to feed them over winter. But I'm wondering if what that must have been like must have been quite similar in some ways to the ark, having animals living with you and cohabiting.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Perhaps it's similar to having all these dogs being adopted during this quarantine.
Yeah, so both the clean and unclean animals as being therapy animals.
Sure. Yeah, pigs can be very therapeutic. Pigs can be really funny.
This is old. They could not eat the unclean animals. So they could.
That's right. They couldn't eat the pig.
This is the Old Testament, so they could not eat the unclean animals.
And they only had a pair of each of the uncleans, so you
That's
wouldn't
true.
want to break up a pair.
Well, I'm thinking about this question. How does Noah determine? Somebody pointed out that God told him, now get out. So I was thinking about that in terms of Noah didn't make the decision. There was somebody who had more, a greater perspective, shall we say, than the person inside the ark. You know, with the notice that it was safe. Not going to give divine status to the governor or even the bishop, but
I don't need to do that.
You know, sort of semi-scientifically, you've had a flood like that. The water is polluted, the land is polluted.
Right.
Even if this water has receded, you need for the sunlight to hit the land to make it, you know, habitable. Walking around in your Wellingtons might not have been enough.
Did they have Wellingtons?
No,
No, they didn't have any.
couldn't, because
That's the
it's named
point.
for a man who was born much later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were wearing Birkenstocks.
I guess in today's world, I'll send up the drone to see where the land is and how far it is.
That was the dove.
Yeah.
That was really good.
So what's the story saying to us, right? What's the story saying to you? And or we can conflate these two questions. What's the story saying to Good Shepherd?
Be
Don't rush
patient.
Has
Be
anybody
patient.
seen-
Patient? What else?
Does anybody
was
see
sitting
this
in-
as a story of a second Genesis? In both cases, you have mankind regenerating from one family. And because of that, it says to me that this is more allegorical than literal. Otherwise, you'd have to accept, and forgive me for saying this, that we're all children of incest.
Yes.
I think what it says to that, you know, God asked Noah to do something almost unobtainable, overwhelming, and yet he did what he was asked. And it's just like sort of us, what we're facing right now. You know, we're asking to deal with some pretty amazing odds and live the way we're going to have to live, probably most likely through the end of the year. And I think that's the same for Good Shepherd. You know, we can't do what we want to do. We have to do what's right for ourselves and what's right for each other, what's right for our church. And, you know, we may not agree with that, but I think that's what we have to do. So sometimes God gives us some challenges, and I think we learn from them. And I think this of a story like this is almost more than, not so much what did the animals eat, but more, it's the story of doing what God has told. It's doing what God has told us to do, and what God expects of us, and we'll come out okay in the end. And I think that's what the story says to me. I mean, it doesn't concern me what they ate or whatever. It's, you know, we have a challenge right now, and we can handle it just like Noah handled it, and we'll be all right in the end. And you just have to live by God's word and what God wants. And that's how I see it.
Seems like we can't rush it either. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I can't remember who just said be patient. I think it's kind of two sides of the same coin. We just can't rush it. There's a time and a pace that we can't control.
I think one of the hardest times for me in my adult years is learning that it's not on my time, it's on God's time. And that comes up for me over and over and over again, and dealing with all sorts of issues. And, you know, God's time is different than what my time is, or our time might be. So that's how it applies to me.
Building on Becky's
Agree with
point,
that.
rushing it is like taking an avocado pear and trying to make it soft by pushing it. You know, it's not
Yeah.
ready to be eaten, but the more you push it and make it soft doesn't make it ripe. So
It just makes it bruised.
yeah, it makes it bruised and unedible.
Good comparison. Good comparison.
Other thoughts about what this story is saying to you personally?
It's an issue of faith. Just having the faith that in spite of what is a dreary, for whatever reason, day, that it will end. And the promise of the rainbow has always been important to me, even way back in Sunday school, because it is the promise that of God that the earth will never be destroyed by water again, but also it's the issue of the promise at the end of faith. And I think that's one of the hardest things for Americans who haven't experienced much defeat in one way or another to empathize with those who have. We just don't get it in many ways. We can say the right words, but we really don't get it. And I'm keenly aware of that with my daughter Mary. I don't get the trauma that she evidently goes through when she seizes. And we've had 2 of them the other night. And I think, oh, thank God I don't live with that. Thank God I don't have that. But, and that I haven't experienced what she's experienced. So I think there's an important thing in faith and the promise.
Anyone who hasn't said anything want to jump in on this question or the next question? What do you think this story is saying to Good Shepherd?
Well, the alternative of, say, leaving the ark too soon, or losing it, perhaps, and running screaming out of the ark, or trying to hurry it, will lead to disaster.
Right.
So you have to live in your head in this case and not in your heart. You have to manage your impulse control.
You do.
And you have to think it through very clearly. And then when you've done it, you've got to be sure that even if you made a mistake doing it, you were doing the very best job you could, so that you can forgive yourself for the mistake that might cost somebody's life.
It's saying that for Good Shepherd, it's saying follow the path, that the governor is setting, I think. Or, well, we hear it on the news. But in the story, it's saying 40 days and 40 nights, and that's the end of the story. In real world right now, we don't know how long. And that's what makes it even more difficult. But we are good shepherds to follow the rules.
But in our lives now, currently, the 40 days and 40 nights is representative of our quarantine and the new way we have to live. And it's tough, you know. I don't think anybody is enjoying this, you know, but
I agree.
We do what we have to do, and that's our 40 days and 40 nights kind of thing. So to me, this is a story about, you know, doing what you need to do to get to the rainbow at the end, as she said, you know, and taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other in the meantime, even though it's unpleasant and it's, you know, not what we want. And God gives us all kinds of stumbling blocks or arcs to build or whatever. And we can overcome that. We can do that with his help and with each other. I guess Noah's Ark is not a parable, is it, Father Gary? But to me, it's almost, that's what I'm trying to say. I mean, obviously, if Noah's family got on there and there were no other people, you know, then we all came from Noah and his group. You know, we all descended from them. There was, I'm sure, many animals, or like somebody said, mosquitoes, you know, that weren't on the ark. So to me, this represents sort of the parable. You know, this is an overwhelming obstacle that they overcame and did, you know, what God asked them to do. So that's what it means to me.
I think the fact that God enters into a covenant with Noah and subsequent generations speaks to me that there's something important happening to us as a body, and we'll see what covenant God will enter into with us after, during and after this time.
I was struck, I hadn't thought about this before, but just in terms of this last question, you know, if we'll take the story at face value and that Noah gets on the boat with all of these critters, and then the earth is destroyed.
Yes.
And, you know, it's not like they had their house to go back to.
Yes.
You know, they had to start from scratch with what they had on the boat.
Right.
And so, and with the knowledge, certainly the knowledge and all of that they had, but you know, they couldn't go back to Great Clips. They had to figure out how to cut their own hair. You know, all of these things. So they had to deal with the future with what they had on the boat. And you know, so what I'm hearing or seeing, or you know, sort of thinking about this in terms of a good shepherd of the church or whatever, is we'll get off the boat with what we had on the boat and to rebuild with what we had on the boat. So the question I keep thinking about and really want to engage folks in conversation about, not this morning, but is, you know, what have we learned on this boat that's, or on this island that's COVID land or whatever? What have we learned? And what is that we rebuild with, rather than trying to reconstruct things that were old, that at least in the Noah story got wiped out by the flood. I'm not saying that that's the same, but you know, what have we learned on the on this boat, on this ark? And so that's, I think, what I'm getting from this is that, you know, they got off the boat with what they went onto the boat with, but nothing else.
But I think in our case, we've got some new building materials that we weren't comfortable working with before we got on this boat.
Yep. I think that's right. And who knows what Noah and his family learned after, 80 days on that ark with all those animals. They wouldn't have learned otherwise.
Well, just like we're learning. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of changes. I think the pace of life was just so frantic all the time. This has really taught me personally to slow down and what's important and what's not important. Maybe a little more, to be more aware of that and prioritize a little differently. Instead of trying to do everything, I prioritize a little differently. I mean, that's what I learned from it, and I don't think we'll all go back quite the same as we were before. I hope we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And for Good Shepherd, what do you think what's going to happen with Good Shepherd? The difference in the service and the communion, and I mean, look at the things that are going to possibly be examined and changed there. And then maybe when we get a vaccine, we'll all go back to the way it was before.
Will we
Other
want
thoughts?
to? Will we want to if we've been doing it this way for quite a while?
Well, I'm not going to go back to everything the way I did before, whether we have a vaccine or we don't. I've learned a lot from this. In a way, it's been good.
Well, there are plenty of Protestant churches, numerous, more in the United States than I think any other country in the world, including Great Britain or Australia, that have a different structure to their services. And my husband, who sort of raised Roman Catholic, obviously baptized and confirmed, went to St. Thomas More one Sunday. And when he came home, he said, I'm not going to go back. They had only guitars and people just singing like that. It wasn't right. It wasn't church. And he didn't go back. But when he started coming to Good Shepherd with me, he went to the 6 o'clock service. And he was very comfortable with it, although he would have loved the music at the 10 o'clock. It just was too early for him at that time in his life. And I think you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I've read now 2 novels by a British writer, Sandburn, I think is his name, about Tudor England and the Reformation in England. He's very historically accurate. And it's really important to realize that the English church broke with Rome, but really didn't change that much, except that the head of the church was now the king. And other than that, they really didn't change God a lot, even though the founder of our church, the Archbishop that carried the 8th name, Cranmer, visited with John Calvin. He visited with John Knox, who really put the Presbyterian Church in place in Scotland. And Presbyterians are more based on the sermon. There's more scripture in the Episcopal Church than there is in the Presbyterian Church. So I think when we get to changing to try to pull in audience, if that's what it is, the big churches right now have more of a performance-based service. A lot of people doing a lot of performance. And Ornstein is on Sunday nights late, and I mean he's got a television program. He's like, he's that, and it's very performance-based. So I think when we look at it, there's a place to say, I don't need to be wedded to something, but there are elements in the liturgy that are extremely meaningful to me and important to me, and I will be where those important things are a part of the liturgy. And I found more of the liturgy important in the Episcopal Church than I did in the Presbyterian Church, and I'm a cradle Presbyterian. So, and high church Presbyterian, not low church Presbyterian. So it was.
So I'm going to interrupt you, Irma, because we're running short on time. I want to see if there's anyone else who wants to jump in here before we close up.
I would really like to know your opinion, Father Gary, on what do you think this story is saying to Good Shepherd?
Well, I think I don't really have a whole lot to add to what other folks have said. I think that there is, there are obviously some comparisons between being shut up for a long period of time. I mean, we won't get out of our arc. I mean, thinking just moving from season 2 to season 3 in the diocesan structure, we'll be in our arc for a lot longer time than Noah and his family was.
And that's just looking out the window.
You know, but what I really like, and maybe I just sort of telegraphed this a little bit earlier, is that we've got what we need to rebuild, and we'll come out of this with some new insights, and we're forced to look differently. I think that's what this is telling us, is that we're everybody, and I'm not just talking about Good Shepherd or any church. I mean, everybody was on kind of an autopilot. Life was going on as it was going on, and now we have to really stop and think about things. You've said it also, Renee, that you're going to slow down. You're going to look at things differently. I think all of this is it's time. We've got to look at things differently. Whether it's worship, whether it's outreach, whether it's community building, all of those kinds of things. We have new tools, we have new insights. What's that going to look like?
Right, and then you put on top of that what's gone on in the last week and a half or two.
Yep.
Yes.
Racism. So you put that, and that changes, I think, the outlook. It certainly changes my perspective on how I consciously or unconsciously have viewed things. I have to honestly tell you, I grew up in the East, and I have some prejudice because I've had some pretty bad experiences. But I've tried not to, I've thought a lot about that, let's just say, in the last few weeks. It's made me think a lot about it. Pretty significant stuff happened. And so I think we put that on top of this other with the COVID and everything else. I mean, for me personally, there's a lot going on. I mean, there's going to be some changes. And I think for most of you here and most of the people that I've talked to, I think we have a lot to maybe rethink. I'm going to, and it's almost a question of priorities,
And if you think about it, why did this flood happen? Well, it was because people had lost track of the priorities.
Right.
And so the sad thing a little bit about this story in the Bible is that there's really not much said about what impact this had on those humans that were on the ark. What did they learn from the experience, and how did they live differently when they got off the ark?
Right.
I think
They set up really high break walls.
I think this is an opportunity for change.
Yeah.
And there are three distinct questions one asks when you change. What are we going to continue to do? What are we going to stop doing? And what are we going to do differently? So if we give thought to all three of those, what are we going to hold on to at Good Shepherd and continue to do? What are we going to stop doing that we have we used to doing, and we have an opportunity to stop it if we wanted to? And what are we going to do differently? So I think that's a nice little simple model to use for change.
Yep. Thank you. I think this story, and I'm not going to have the last word here. I'll let somebody else do that. But I just want to say I think this is a good story about experiencing upheaval, because clearly that's what this is all about. And we got the ark to get us from point A to point B during the upheaval. I think another great, it's a much longer story, but the book of Acts is just such a fabulous description of the church trying to figure out how to survive upheaval, to go from this teeny little group of Jesus's followers to make it all the way to Rome and beyond, and all of the all that went into that, and the upheaval, things had to change, and so I'm thinking about the book of Acts as well in this context. But again, that's a different story. Who would like the last word?
Mother Mary.
Bye.
Thank you all for being here. Next week,
Thank you.
again, is the passage from Isaiah about doing a new thing. You'll recognize it. It's much shorter. And the questions, you can find both the passage and the questions on the website. We've put them up there. So everybody have a good week if I don't see you between now and next Sunday. It's been great to spend time with you this morning.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great sermon, Father Gary.
Yes,
Thank
it
you, Brian.
was.
It was great.
Great sermon.
Thank you.